Hi everybody, my name is Mikhailo Oleksienko. I am Grandmaster from Ukraine. My current ELO is 2643. I'm also current Ukrainian Rapid Chess Champion. Today I would like to share with you my experience from the last round of the MDI Open Tournament, which was held in August 2013 in Dresden, Germany. This was the game from last round. Me, my opponent, and 3 other players had 6 out of 8. We were playing on board number 1. I was white. My opponent was German Grandmaster Henrik Teske. So basically a decisive round in an open tournament. So the game went on like this. d4. This already came as a surprise to my opponent because I only recently started playing d4. Played d5, knight f3, knight f6, c4. Usually he preferred c6 or e6, aiming for either Slav defense or Queen's Gambit declined. But in this game he decided to go for Queen's Gambit accepted. e3. And now he surprised me again. When he was choosing Queen's Gambit accepted before, he was usually playing bishop to g4, and I was prepared for it. But now he decided to go for a totally new move for him, e6. And this is actually a place to learn for you, because it is very common strategy when your opponent surprises you in the opening, when you were not expecting some line, which he clearly have prepared using database, engines, etc. It usually does make sense to go for some sideline, or for the line you have never even played before, hoping that your opponent would not be ready there. Because even psychologically it's hard to play when you know you're fighting against Houdini or Stockfish or whichever engine your opponent was using during the preparation. So now after 4 moves we were psychologically equal. I surprised him with my first move, he surprised me with his 3rd and 4th move, so we were even now. Bishop takes c4, c5, castle, knight c6, we're gonna skip these moves, knight c3, a6, a5, and I believe now my opponent made an inaccuracy. He played c takes d4, and I recaptured with a pawn. I'm not gonna tell you why I consider this move to be an accuracy. Hopefully you will get it on your own. Later on my next few moves, I would suggest that you stop the video and guess my following moves. I believe this is a very good way to learn from any lecture. If you get to think on your own, if you don't get the answer right away. Because if you think on your own, you have some ideas, you consider some lines, and then you make your choice. And then you know what was the correct one. And if you guessed correctly, good for you. But if no, it means you can learn. Maybe you overlooked something. Maybe you didn't evaluate the position correctly. Maybe you were aiming for some wrong setup of pieces, etc. So I'm not gonna tell you why I think it was an accuracy yet. Hopefully you will get it on your own. I believe the main move here and the strongest is bishop to e7. Just continuing the development. So my opponent took on d4, e takes d4, and now he played bishop e7. And now I would suggest that you stop the video and think for a couple of minutes, what would you do if you were white here? So here I played bishop to g5, which I believe is a strong move in this position. Hopefully you've realized what was the difference. Why do I consider c takes d4 to be an accuracy? If my opponent had played bishop e7 here, now my own pawn on e3 would be in the way of development of my bishop, and that wouldn't be very pleasant for me. But he went on for capturing on d4, and now my bishop from c1 is free to go wherever he wants. e3, f4, g5, which was totally not available for him 1 move ago. But why do I choose the g5 square? I believe this is the best square for a bishop in most cases when you're playing with an isolated pawn. So I believe bishop e3 would be an inaccuracy. because you need to be aware of a general plan. Before you develop your pieces, you need to know what is your plan. What should you aim for in the position? Because if you don't think about your plan after, before you finish your development, you need to be aware of where would you like your pieces to be and what you're gonna do next. Because if you develop pieces in a normal way and then you realize that you have no plan left, usually when you have an isolated pawn, the plan involves attacking the king on g8 or pushing d5, opening the position for your pieces. Those are two plans when you possess an isolated pawn. If you don't pursue any of those, you just have a weakness on d4. But if you create kingside attack, which white can do because white has much more space than black, well, that would be quite dangerous for black. So I believe placing the bishop on e3, for example, on lower levels, I very often see white playing this position as following. Black castles, white plays rook c1, places a rook on open c file. Let's say black plays knight to b4, queen e2 continuing the development, b6, rook f to d1, and bishop to b7. Technically, white did finish the development in a seemingly logical way. But as it turns out, this setup is not pursuing any of the mentioned plans. Black's king is completely safe. There are no pieces near him. White cannot push d5 in the nearest future. Black grasps full control over this square. And if white is not pursuing any of those plans, white is just left with an isolated pawn and weak square on d5. So I believe this is a wrong way to play with an isolated pawn. So what about bishop f4? It seems like an active move as well. Here I would argue that this is also not the best place for a bishop for one simple reason. In most cases, eventually, black's gonna do knight b4. I'm not saying you should do it now, you should castle in this position. But then eventually you would go with the knight to b4. This is a good place for a knight. And then some of the knights would jump to d5, attacking this bishop, and it would be under attack. If you decide to move away your bishop to g3, which again, white shouldn't be doing right now, but to illustrate the point, this bishop could be eventually exchanged with knight to h5, and it would have no decent square to go to avoid an exchange. And what else you need to know about playing with an isolated pawn? Since black doesn't have a lot of space, black would literally like to exchange any pair of same valued pieces. If you suggest queen's exchange, yes please. Any pair of rooks, any pair of bishops, same bishops, any pair of knights, black is ready to make this trade. You need to be aware of that. So I believe bishop to g5 is an active move. On the other hand, bishop to e3 is a passive move. An active move is a move when your piece is attacking your opponent's pieces or some weaknesses. A passive piece is a piece which is doing passive job, like in this case protecting a weakness. The bishop on e3 at the moment is like a huge pawn. It's just protecting a weakness. It's not an active job. If you can have an active job for your piece, usually you should do that instead of playing passively. So bishop to g5 and now castle. Now I would again suggest you stop the video and try to come up with a move that you would make in the game. So in the game I played rook to e1. Rook to e1. You might wonder, why didn't I play rook to c1? Developing the rook from a1 to only open file, why didn't I do that? And the reason is in my previous comment. The reason is black is ready to make any exchange possible with the same valued pieces. Putting the rook on open file is like committing it to be exposed to exchange. Black will eventually put his rook on c8, for example after knight to b4, pawn to b6, bishop to b7, and rook to c8. When you put your rook on open file, but you cannot penetrate, let's say to c7, it means your rook will be exposed to an exchange. And this is what we're trying to avoid. I believe when you play with an isolated pawn, you should ignore the C file with your rooks. You should put your rooks in the central files, D and E files. This way they would support the breakthrough, D5, and help possibly with the kingside attack. So rook C1 I believe to be an accuracy. So that's why I play rook E1. My opponent play bishop to D7. Again, I would suggest you stop the video and try to guess the move. So I need to finish my development quickly in order to, I am better developed. I need to finish my development as quickly as possible and then launch the kingside attack or a breakthrough in the center. So I played queen E2. And I believe it's also a strong move. Why didn't I choose queen to D2? The reason is my next move is rook A to D1. And I really like my rook to be looking at my opponent's queen. Sort of an X-ray. If my queen would be in the way, well, it wouldn't be an X-ray. But if my queen is put it aside to E2, this X-ray is very dangerous. Another reason why I want my queen to be on E2, there's a pressure down the E file towards the bishop on E7. We'll see later how that works out for me. So I believe queen E2 is a strong move. Rook to C8. Now you can also stop the video. Guess my next move. My next move was rook A to D1. I am finishing my development. I'm completely fully developed. And I'm ready to do active business. H6. My opponent played H6. Also, I would suggest you guess my following move. I played bishop to H4. So I don't want to make any changes on F6. I don't want to move back my bishop, so I keep the tension on that diagonal. Bishop to F6 would make sense if after D5 I can get significant initiative. But after E takes D, knight takes D, I believe after rook E8, black should be alright, exchanging pair of rooks, and hopefully eventually my initiative would evaporate. So that's why I kept the tension with bishop to H4. The only problem, I believe, with keeping the bishop on this diagonal, it is exposed to an exchange of a bishop on E7, and you need to be aware of that. My opponent tries to make use of it with knight H5, which was his last mistake in the game. But you need to be aware of this trick. After knight H5, now my bishop on H4 will get exchanged. I will either take on E7, exchanging pieces, or move it to G3 when it would be captured by a knight. Basically, black forces me for this exchange, which is what black usually really prefers when he doesn't have a lot of space. I would suggest you guess my next move in this position. Stop the video and guess my next move. So my next move was D5. Another rule I would like to teach you here is that when your pieces are at top activity, like I cannot really imagine how can I improve any of my pieces. Only maybe one thing come to mind is putting the knight to E5, but in this case it's not working at the moment. So if your pieces are well developed, they are very active, you should look for tactics. You should look for a breakthrough. Because if you are at your top activity, but you cannot do anything about it, your opponent will finish the development will activate his pieces more, and if you cannot do anything about your activity, your advantage would evaporate. So when your pieces are completely developed, fully coordinated, you should look for tactics. You should look for a breakthrough like D5. For example, I believe bishop to E7, knight takes E7. If I do some silly moves like bishop to B3, knight to F6, then some move H3, after bishop to C6, black takes full control over the D5 square. I'm not gonna break through there. His king is safe. Basically, I didn't pursue any of my plans, and black could even hope to be better in this position. So, returning to the actual game that happened in my game, actual moves, I did play D5, and I believe it is a correct move, very active one. So, and now you can see the point why d5 is such a good move. And we can see that if black takes on d5, my queen on e2 now becomes very well placed, because the bishop on e7 is now hanging. If the queen was on d2, the bishop on e7 would be well protected, and there would be no x-ray down the d file. Now, after bishop takes e7, knight takes e7, queen takes e7, black cannot recapture on the e7 because, well, he would be one piece down. However, black can still play rook takes c4, but after knight takes d5, white is just dominating. The x-ray down the d file, completely discoordinated pieces. White is winning in a few moves here. Black has no decent moves left here. So that's why I wanted to place my queen on e2, and actually I believe this setup is a very good setup for white. White is aiming for d5 and or knight to e5, improving his last piece. And black is already, I believe, here facing problems. Knight h5 was a miscalculation, but a very complicated one. So d5 was played. Knight to f4, good intermediate move played by my opponent. Now I would again suggest you guess my next move. Queen to e3 is the correct move in this position. First of all, I keep on, clearly my queen was hanging, I need to move it, right? But where would I move it? There are plenty of squares available, e4, e3, d2, c2. First of all, I need to do it with a tempo because this is completely forced position. And secondly, I want to leave the d file open for my rook. The third point is I need my queen on the e file so that the bishop on e7 would still be hanging. And I didn't choose queen e4 because then the queen would be, for example, if I would have chosen queen to e4, at some point e takes d5 would come with a tempo. So I need my queen. A queen doesn't like to be disturbed, you know, that's why I put it to e3. E takes d5 was played, and now queen takes f4. Because if I go for the same bishop e7, knight takes e7, queen takes e7, rook takes c4, now black is doing all right because his knight on f4 protects the pawn on d5, and black should be all right here. But I took the knight on f4. This is completely forced line, and my opponent went for d takes c4. Actually, I was expecting other moves like bishop takes h4, and here I calculated two lines. Knight takes h4, d takes c4, knight to f5, putting more pressure on the king side. All my pieces are active. There's a pin down the d file. The g7 pawn would be in trouble soon. Queen to c7, and if anything, I noticed that I can win an exchange with knight d5. Bishop takes f. If rook c8, it loses even a piece. After knight e7 check. If bishop takes f5, knight takes c7, I have big advantage here. So this is what I was calculating. Also, I have seen that I can play knight to d5, bishop g5, takes, and move the queen somewhere, keeping huge initiative. But my opponent surprised me. He plays d takes c4. Clearly, I've seen this move, calculating when I played d5. But I thought, all right, I will take on e7, knight takes e7, and then there are two pieces on d7, e7 that are in trouble, and I can attack both of them with queen to d6. Attacking both of them, he cannot protect both of them. I will win a piece and the game. And I was wondering, how did Grandmaster miss such an easy tactics? But it turned out that I was missing easy defense. I recommend that you stop video here and find the defense for black in the mentioned line after bishop takes e7, knight takes e7, queen d6. It turns out that there's a move that I missed. There's bishop to e6 move. Two pieces indeed are hanging. Indeed, black cannot protect both of them, but black can use one piece as a shield to protect the other one. And this is what I missed in my calculations. I was so angry at myself. I thought I was winning. Last round, important game. But then I, pulled myself together, forced myself to think, and very quickly I found a win here for white. So, now another task for you, starting from this position. I want you to stop the video and find the only forcing win for white in this position. So the game actually ended after knight takes e7, bishop e7, knight takes e7, and queen d6. And my opponent resigned. Because the thing he overlooked was that bishop to e6, I have rook takes e6. F takes e6, queen e6 comes with a check, and I win a queen and the game. So he resigned. So this was my pleasant experience beating a grandmaster in 19 moves in the last round of a tournament on board number 1. Unfortunately, I got the second place anyway. Samuel Shankland from USA won his game as well. A beautiful game, actually. If you get a chance, you can take a look at in database. He sacrificed a rook or something. So he deserved to win, and I was second one, but still not very often you can see a game grandmaster losing in 19 moves. So I hope you learned something new from this video. Hope to see you soon. Take care. Bye bye.